What if I told you the most powerful corporation in history wasn't Apple, Amazon, or Google? It was a company that had its own private army, larger than most nations. It could start wars, overthrow governments, and control the lives of millions, all to sell you tea, textiles, and spices. This isn't a movie plot. This is the true story of the British East India Company, a corporation that didn't just want your money, it wanted your continent, and it almost got away with it. Our story starts in 1600 with a royal charter from Queen Elizabeth I. Think of this as the world's most consequential permission slip. The East India Company's goal was simple: go to the Spice Islands, get rich on pepper and cloves, and try not to get killed by the Dutch, who were the original spice lords. The Dutch were unimpressed with the new competition, so the EIC, like any good underdog, pivoted. They looked at the Indian subcontinent and said, "Fine, we'll take that instead." It was the corporate equivalent of going to a party for the cake, but then taking over the entire house. They started trading for Indian cotton and silk, which was an instant hit. Suddenly, every fashionable person in London wanted to look like they'd just come from a very important nap. The EIC was making money, but they were about to discover their true calling. Not just trade, but taking over the factory. So how do you go from running a warehouse to running a country? The EIC wrote the playbook. Step 1, exploit local politics. As the Mughal Empire began to fragment, the EIC didn't see chaos, they saw a market opportunity. They started playing rival princes and nawabs against each other, offering the military support of their sepoys, Indian soldiers trained in European tactics. Enter Robert Clive, a man who looked at a subcontinent and saw a chessboard. His masterstroke was the Battle of Plassey in 1757. The opposing army had 50,000 soldiers. Clive had 3,000. The odds were terrible, unless you had a secret weapon, a massive betrayal you'd paid for in advance. The battle was less a fight and more a corporate merger, finalized with cannon fire. After winning, the EIC installed a puppet ruler and did something genius and terrifying. They took over the tax collection system for Bengal. Let that sink in. A corporation was now legally entitled to take money from millions of farmers and artisans. They went from selling you stuff to owning the ground you walked on. It's the ultimate upsell. Your modern internet provider just overcharges your fees. The EIC taxed your entire life. The result was an artificial famine in Bengal in 1770. While the EIC raised taxes, millions starved. It was one of the first and darkest examples of a corporation prioritizing profit over human life on a catastrophic scale. With their tax money, the EIC built the world's largest corporate army. They weren't just security, they were the sales and acquisitions department. They would march into a region, defeat the local ruler, and force them to sign an exclusivity deal, meaning you can only sell your goods to us and we'll set the price. It's like if Amazon showed up at your small business with a battalion and said, "You're now a prime vendor. Congratulations." Now let's talk about the great wealth transfer. The EIC systematically dismantled India's legendary industries. Indian textiles, smothered by British factory-made cloth, often made from Indian cotton. It was the original outsourcing. They turned India from a manufacturing titan into a raw material supplier, the classic colonial trap. And then there was tea. Britain developed a massive addiction, and the EIC had a monopoly. But China, the only tea producer, wanted silver. The EIC's solution was diabolical. They started mass-producing opium in India and smuggling it into China. When China said, "Stop poisoning our people," the EIC's response was to call in the British Navy, the world's most heavily armed customer support team, leading to the Opium Wars. It was a drug cartel, backed by a government. By the time the EIC was done, India's share of the global economy had been gutted, falling from 25% to just a few percent. The golden bird had been systematically plucked. But in 1857, the entire system cracked. The Indian Rebellion, or the First War of Independence, erupted. The trigger was a cultural blunder of epic proportions, a rumor that new rifle cartridges were greased with cow and pig fat, offensive to Hindu and Muslim soldiers. For the EIC, it was a catastrophic HR failure. For India, it was the final straw. The rebellion was brutally suppressed, but the EIC's brand was toxic. They had caused too many wars, too many famines, and too much embarrassment. In 1858, the British government performed the world's first corporate bailout and takeover. They fired the EIC's management, which in this case meant dissolving the company, and took direct control of India. The corporation that owned a country was no more. So what's the legacy of the East India Company? It's a stark warning about what happens when corporate power operates without accountability. It's the ghost in the machine of modern capitalism. When we see companies with more data than governments, more influence than nations, and their own private rules, we have to ask, are we seeing the echoes of the East India Company? The next time you sip your tea, order something online, or scroll through a platform that feels like its own world, remember the company that blurred the line between a boardroom and a throne room. The story of the EIC proves that the most powerful empire isn't always a country. Sometimes it's a brand. This was the corporation that stole a country. If this story of insane power and its consequences fascinated you, you'll love my video on how America became stupidly rich. Smash that like button, subscribe for more untold stories of money and power, and crucially, tell me in the comments, what lesson from the East India Company do you think is most relevant for today's world?
Thanks for watching. Bye-bye.